As the sun came up over Camp Happy Trails, Hans watched. The people were getting onto yellow buses. He was still hungry. He was going to teach them, like he taught the others. But he had stopped. He'd heard one of them talk about her. He'd waited, biding his time. This one would take him to her. He knew this. She would pay. They all would pay, but first he must wait, be patient. Too greedy, mein Kind, Mommy would say. He would feast, soon, but first he must know of her, know how to find her. Ryko yawned as the bus pulled into the familiar surround of Maple Lane, a normal sleepy town, much like any other. Home at last, she muttered sleepily. She must admit that she'd been wrong. The camp was great. She'd made new friends and shared stories around the campfire. It had brought the normally shy Ryko even more out of her shell. There were no bad vibes about from what happened the previous year. Everyone was open and honest about it. She remembered the day that she'd arrived, storming into the camp owner's office and slamming the newspaper clipping down on his desk. "How do you explain this?" she challenged. "Teen killer held at Wolf Asylum," the bold headline read. Jim had then sat down all the new counsellors and explained about the incident last year. Laurie Carpenter was the girl's name. An awful shame, but she was under so much pressure. Her boyfriend playing away was what caused her to snap, blaming it all on the mythical Hans. At least that's what Jim had thought. That was all in the past. The camp had a new team of counsellors and Laurie was safely locked away. Anyway, none of that mattered now. She was home and excited to tell everyone about the camp. As Ryko strolled lazily down Maple Lane towards her house, she didn't see the huge bulk of Hans drop to the floor from underneath the bus as it rounded the corner. Hans stood, dusted himself down and unhooked his massive sledgehammer from his back. He cocked his head to the side and looked at his new surroundings. He was looking for revenge, but first he must find the girl who could lead him to Laurie. It was a late September Friday evening, after another normal day on Maple Lane. Most of the residents were going about their daily routines. Some were quietly watching TV or doing chores around the house, some returning home from a day out. Susan Nelson was tidying, and Ryko's boyfriend Donnie was deciding whether to text Ryko again, or just wait for her to come over like she'd agreed. Ryko and Donnie made an odd couple, him a gangly 6 foot tall, against Ryko's 5'2" athletic frame. But there was no doubting his devotion to her, although Ryko did think he could be a little clingy at times. Ryko passed the Jenkinson kids playing ball in the street as she biked over to the Smalleys on her beloved cruiser Lightning. "Getting dark, kids. Time to think about heading home," she called to them as she passed. "Sure thing, Ryko," Billy replied. "Just 10 more minutes." Ryko arrived at the Smalleys' house to feed the cats, her good deed while they were away on vacation in Paris. She was just finishing up putting the empty tins of cat food into the trash when she glanced out the window towards the intersection. Something caught her eye. Focusing, she stared for a minute as a huge figure emerged from the bushes. "Holy shit," Ryko said aloud, quickly stepping back from the window. The daylight was fading quickly as Hans stepped out onto the intersection. Breathing heavily through his rusty pighead iron mask, he looked up and down Maple Lane. The others were unaware. No one had seen him. He'd lifted the massive sledgehammer and rested it over his shoulder. He would find the girl who would lead him to Laurie, but first he must punish them. He must eat. Ryko was already heading for the door when her phone beeped. She looked down at it. A message from Donnie. "Hey babe, where are you?" She tapped the reply as she ran from the Smalleys' house. "He's here, in the street. He's just standing there. Stay inside. I'm going to get help." "What's going on over there?" came the reply. Ryko didn't answer it. That thing was heading straight for the Jenkinson kids. She had to warn them. At full speed she vaulted the white picket fence in the Smalleys' front yard, swooping down and picking up Lightning, starting to pedal furiously towards the intersection, her bar streamers flapping in the wind. "What the hell am I doing?" she thought to herself. It was now almost dark. Little Billy Jenkinson turned to pick up the baseball that his sister had tossed to him. It's time to get home now. As he turned to look for the ball, his eyes met the sight of a massive boot. He slowly looked up to see the full size of the massive man standing before him. Billy's jaw dropped slowly as Hans lifted his hammer, readying for the swing. At that very moment, Ryko flew round the corner on Lightning, her back wheels skidding on the road and slamming into Hans's leg. Hans staggered backwards slightly. Off balance, he unleashed a swift horizontal swing of his hammer. The hammer rushed over the head of Ryko as she slid and threw Lightning to the floor, leaping off towards the flabbergasted-looking Billy. Missing Ryko by inches, the powerful swing connected with the transformer attached to the utility pole. It exploded in a ball of sparks and fire, causing Hans to bellow a muffled roar under his mask and retreat backwards. Maple Lane plunged into darkness as the power went out. Not missing a stride, Ryko scooped Billy up by the hood of his coat, carrying him almost effortlessly and placing him down next to his sister. Putting herself in between the monster and the children, she shouted, "Go!" Billy and Judy didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their bikes and pedalled furiously towards home. Ryko turned, readying herself for the confrontation. Hans stood, shocked by the speed of events. The transformer blazed in the background, casting his dancing shadow across the intersection. He stepped back away from the fire, aware of the figure in front of him, but hesitant past the flames. The noise behind him made him turn. Fresh blood, he thought to himself as he strode west down Maple Lane away from Ryko. Martha and Jed Jackson were just sitting down to watch their favourite game show when the power went out. "Darn, Martha, did you hear that? That's the main transformer. I told the darn Residents Association that thing was on its last legs." "Phones are out too, honey," Martha called back. Jed grabbed a candle from under the sink, lit it and looked out the window onto Maple Lane. "Martha, lock the doors," he said quietly, snuffing out the candle. Ryko stood square in the street, fists clenched. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness as the fire from the transformer began to die. She stared down the dimming light of Maple Lane and saw the massive bulk of Hans turn and walk in the opposite direction. She relaxed slightly and grabbed her cell phone from her pocket. Damn, no signal. She knew she needed to get help, but if this thing came back for her, she wouldn't have a chance. She needed a weapon. She racked her brains. Petersons, she thought. She knew the Petersons kept a hunting knife displayed on their mantelpiece, and she knew they hid their spare door key under the mat. She quietly slipped into the shadows of the Petersons' yard, retrieved the key and crept into the house. Even in the darkness she knew where to find the knife, grabbing it quickly and heading back out towards the street. Michael Wilson and his wife Jenny were returning home from a good day out at the local bar as they rounded the corner onto Maple Lane. "Yeah, well that's what you would think, isn't it?" Michael shouted back to his wife, who was trailing behind him. "Oh, screw you, Michael Wilson," Jenny yelled back at him. "Now look here, Jenny," Michael started to say, turning back to look at his wife. He abruptly stopped as his staggering body walked straight into the brick wall which was Hans. Michael turned unsteadily. "Hey buddy, watch where you're," Michael slurred as Hans's massive hand grabbed his skull in a vice-like grip, his fingers digging into the temples on either side of Michael's head. Michael had a moment of clarity as Hans lifted him off the floor and squeezed his huge hand, crushing Michael's skull like it were a walnut in the jaws of a nutcracker. The sound was sickening as fragments of the bone penetrated his brain, killing him almost immediately. Jenny Wilson let out a high-pitched scream as Hans dropped Michael's body to the floor. "More fresh blood," he growled, lifting his sledgehammer and advancing towards the hysterical Jenny. Ryko left the Petersons' yard. She urgently needed to get help. Glancing across the street, she saw the glow of the lamp through the Nelsons' window. Hearing the yelling in the distance, she hurried across the road to the Nelsons' drive. The darkness, combined with her haste, led to her kicking up a rock, smashing the headlight of Nelson's brand new SUV. The sound echoed down the road, and she froze, waiting. Nothing. She hurried up the path and rapped on the Nelsons' door. Susan Nelson was busy packing away the fireworks for the upcoming Thanksgiving celebrations when the power had gone out. She took her role as head of Maple Lane Events Committee very seriously and liked to get organised early. She'd found her battery lamp and was just about to sit down for the evening when she heard the rap at the door. Picking up the lamp, she walked down the hallway to open the door to a fearful-looking Ryko. "Reiko, honey, you look terrible. What's going on?" "I need to use your phone, Mrs. N. Is that okay?" "Sure thing, honey. Come on in. It's just there in the hallway." Ryko lifted the receiver. The line was dead. Panicking, Ryko turned to Mrs. Nelson. "The line's dead," she stated. "Well, the power's out. Guess that's the problem. You sure you're okay, honey?" "Look, Mrs. N, you're going to think I'm crazy," Ryko started. "The camp I went to, the girl who they think killed all those people, she didn't. He's here, the real killer. We need help." Susan looked at Ryko carefully. She could see the girl was clearly very distressed. "Well, honey, the power's out, the phones are out. Guess it's going to be like that all over town. Maybe the sheriff's office at Cedar Grove could help. I could drive there if it make you feel any better." "Would you? That's great. Please, get help. I've got to get to Donnie." "Okay, honey, I'll go. You take care. I'll get help." "Great, thanks. Hey, you mind if I borrow some of these fireworks? I'll replace them," Ryko asked as they headed for the door. "Well, sure thing." "Thanks." Ryko grabbed the box of fireworks as they headed out of the house. Susan Nelson got into her car as Ryko headed back out onto the street. Susan started up the engine. Ah, shoot, the headlight bulb's out, she cursed herself as she pulled out of the drive. And this thing is brand new. Ryko was heading back towards the intersection to grab Lightning as Susan passed her in the white SUV. If she could get to Donnie's, maybe he had cell signal. Maybe they could call for help before Susan reached Cedar Grove. She inspected the box of fireworks. Great, it had a timer. This might just work. Carefully placing the fireworks in the road, she set the timer. This could prove a good distraction. Buy enough time for them. She picked Lightning up from the road and headed towards Donnie's house. Ava Jones couldn't believe the last few days. It all started one morning when she woke up. She was about to leave the house when a dreadful feeling came over her, a strong sense of impending doom. She delayed her journey that morning, missing the derailment of the 7:15 train. Quite a stroke of luck. Since then, things have been on the up. Free coffee at the local diner, the bus home stopping to wait for her, even several competition wins from an online community. She had a good feeling about the lotto scratch card she just bought. This could be exactly what she was waiting for. She started scratching off the foil as she strode towards home. Bag of dollars. Bag of dollars. Come on, this is it. Susan Nelson turned round to look at the smouldering transformer as she turned left at the intersection to head south towards Cedar Grove. Her broken headlight meant that she didn't see Ava crossing the road. Although she only clipped Ava lightly, it was enough to send her reeling backwards off balance. She turned her ankle and crashed to the floor, her head hitting the sidewalk with a cracking sound, clear fluid seeping from her nose. Gabriel Flores was heading home from his day when the white SUV passed him at speed. Looking up, he saw Ava's body lying on the floor. He looked around. "Help!" he shouted. "They've been hit by a car!" A wind blew down Maple Lane. As Ryko whooshed towards Donnie's house on Lightning, Jenny Wilson staggered backwards, tripping and falling to the floor as hands advanced towards her, the blood from Michael's skull darkening the wood of the handle of his sledgehammer as it dripped from his hands. Putting up her arms to cover her face did not stop the swipe from the massive sledgehammer. The end was mercifully swift for Jenny as the hammer split the air with a dull swoosh, connecting to the side of her head with a thud, shattering her cheekbone to pieces and dislodging her eyeball, which fell to the floor with a dull squelching sound. Her lifeless body slumped slowly backwards. Taking a large butcher's knife from his belt, hands bent down and started to carve the strips of flesh from Jenny as her body still twitched in the last throes of death. He placed the steaks into the pockets of his butcher's apron. With the meticulous task finished, he carefully cleaned the knife on his apron and placed it back in its holster. Then he turned towards the Clark house. Jed Jackson peeked from his window onto the street. He'd witnessed the terrifying death of the Wilsons. "Martha, you sure the doors are locked? This son of a bitch just keeps coming." Gerald Clark had lived on Maple Lane for nigh on 30 years now. Always used to be such a nice place to live, quiet like, just the way he liked it. That was till those damn Wilsons moved into the neighbourhood, always fighting and screaming. He'd just changed into his robe and was settling down for the evening, determined to finish reading his book in peace. And here they were again, carrying on out in the street, no doubt drunk again. Well, Gerald Clark had had enough. "I'm going to give that sumbitch a piece of my mind," he thought, as he grabbed his lamp and stomped towards his front door, flinging it open. As the door swiftly swung open, he wasn't quite prepared for the sight that stood before him. The light from Gerald's lamp cast an eerie glow onto the massive bulk of hands, his 7-foot-tall frame completely blocking the doorway, the rusty iron mask amplifying the sound of the grunting breaths. Gerald looked inquisitively as hands rested his sledgehammer against the doorframe and slowly unsheathed his butcher's knife. The serrated metal blade glinted as the hands thrust it swiftly upwards into the flesh beneath Gerald's chin, the massive blade penetrating through poor Gerald's nasal cavity into his brain. Gerald's eyes widened as the knife bit. His last sight was the burning red eyes of Hans beneath his hideous iron mask. Hans slowly withdrew the knife, again meticulously cleaning the blade before resheathing it and turning it away from the Clark house. Jed was glued to his window. "Martha! Martha! He's coming out of Jerry Wilson's! He came right through the yard!" "Jedediah Jackson, you get away from that window this minute!" chastised Martha as Hans emerged back onto the street. Ryko screeched to a halt at the northern junction to Maple Lane. Javier and Adriana looked up in surprise. "Oh, hey, Reiko," acknowledged Adriana. "We're just out for a stroll. No power. We thought we'd get some fresh air." "Listen, you guys, get home. Lock the door," Ryko almost yelled at them. Javier looked suspiciously at Ryko, slightly taken aback by her abruptness. He noticed the knife tucked into her belt. Backing away, he muttered, "Well, yeah, it's getting late. We'd better get back." The couple turned and hurriedly headed north away from Maple Lane. Just as the pair were heading out of view, Donnie burst from the front door of his house. "Ryko!" he shouted excitedly. What the hell's going on? You didn't answer my text, now my cell signal's out, the power's down. You okay, babe? Ryko grabbed Donnie's upper arms, gripping tightly as she looked him square in the eyes. Donnie, listen, she started. The camp, Laurie Carpenter, the girl they thought killed all the other counsellors. Yeah, babe, I remember. You told me the story. Listen, it wasn't her, the killer, the masked man, Hans. He's here. He nearly killed young Billy Jenkinson. He nearly killed me. Wow, okay, babe, what do we do? I sent Susan Nelson to get help. We've got to try and stop him, Donnie. He'll kill everyone. I took this knife from the Petersons, she said, grabbing the knife from her belt. Laurie Carpenter almost killed him. He can be stopped. I'm fast, you know I am, and I have a way to distract him. Ryko looked at her watch. The show should be starting just about now. The first firework boomed and lit up the sky. Hans looked down the street, confused and somehow delighted. His mind snapped back. The girl, he remembered. The one that would lead him to Laurie. This was her. He strode purposely back towards the intersection. He just keeps coming, Martha, Jed said to his wife while peeking round the curtain. Where's the darn neighbourhood watch when you need them? Ryko slunk through the shadows towards the intersection, Donnie following close behind. She stopped and held her breath as she caught the sight of Hans heading towards the fireworks as planned. Pushing Donnie back into the shadows, she gripped the knife in her hand. This would require crackerjack timing. She put her finger to her lips, motioning Donnie to be quiet, and darted out of the shadows towards Hans. Slipping low behind the monster, she raked the knife across the back of Hans's knees. Blood spurted out across the street. Hans bellowed and turned, swinging his massive hammer with unholy speed. But Ryko was gone. The hammer swung wildly with no target. Slipping again from the shadows, Ryko leapt at Hans from behind, raining down a furious strike of blows with the knife into Hans's shoulders. Again he bellowed, reaching round and swatting Ryko away with his massive arm. Ryko landed with a thud on the roll, rolled to the left and sprang to her feet. As Hans turned, Ryko stepped backwards into the shadows, tripping on a piece of smashed power transformer. Her ankle cracked. She stumbled backwards into the darkness on the other side of the intersection. Bleeding and weakened, Hans staggered away from the intersection. The pain of the attack brought on his hunger. He lurched towards the light of the fireworks. Red clouded his eyes. He must eat. He must have his dark feast. Pausing to crouch in the shadows, he brought out the strips of flesh from his butcher's apron. As Donnie quietly slipped across the intersection, he could hear the wet munching sounds from beneath Hans's iron mask. Reaching the south side of the intersection, Donnie rushed over to Ryko. Babe, your ankle, Donnie whispered. It's fine, Ryko replied. I hurt him, did you see? Yeah, you got him good. Stay here, he's hunched over there, distracted. I'm going to finish this. With that, Ryko was gone, limping towards the kneeling figure of Hans, adrenaline coursing through her body. Hans sensed her approaching, stood to his full height and turned towards the approaching shadow. Almost instantaneously, with a thunderous swing, he brought the hammer over his head, swooping down towards Ryko. Ryko was quick enough to dodge the swing, retaliating with a swift swipe into Hans's abdomen, so powerful it penetrated the thick apron, causing a large gassing wound across the monster's stomach, before falling backwards. Hans reached down and felt the wound. The sleeping blood stained his hand dark red in the dim light. He looked up and advanced towards the silhouette of Ryko, the hammer raised. Again, a massive flash from one of the fireworks lit up the sky. The sound boomed around Maple Lane. Forgetting his attacker, Hans turned and staggered towards the source of the sound, as Ryko slumped back against the white picket fence of the yard adjacent to the intersection. Donnie dashed out to the prostrate Ryko, lying against the fence, and cradled her in his arms. Babe, oh babe, you okay? Yeah, Donnie, I'm good. In the distance, the booming of the fireworks stopped, and it went quiet. Jedediah turned to his wife, shocked. Martha, that Rivers girl's just attacked the madman. What's happening now? Asked Martha. Not sure, it's all gone quiet. Yeah, it's too quiet, if you ask me, Martha replied. Hans reached the fireworks as the last one shot and boomed in the sky. Bending down, he grabbed the spent box in his massive hand, crushing the box and screaming with rage as he realised the trick. The girl! The girl was the ghost who had attacked him. He would again deliver the death blow and feed on her, but first she would tell him where Laurie was. Enraged, he turned and headed back towards the intersection. Donnie saw the massive figure emerging from the darkness towards them. Ryko got slowly to her feet as Donnie pushed her behind him. Donnie stood squarely at the main intersection as Hans approached, all fear in him gone, as he felt the overwhelming urge to protect Ryko from this monster. Donnie ran at Hans, howling like a banshee. The end was mercifully quick, as Hans simply swiped across with his massive right arm, swatting Donnie like a fly and sending him crashing into the curb, his neck snapping like a dry twig. The second blow came from the sledgehammer, this time down towards Ryko. She lifted her arm to block it. The god deflected the main power of the blow, but it shattered her forearm to pieces. Screaming in pain, she staggered backwards and fell to the floor. The third blow came at her again. She managed to roll to the side as the blow deflected off her shoulder, the mighty bulk of the hammerhead thudding against the asphalt on the street. Hans roared and lifted the hammer above his head with both hands. Running on pure adrenaline, Ryko tried to get to her feet, but her ankle gave way. Improvising, she rolled left and let out a furious strike with the knife towards Hans. But as she rolled, a shattered piece of the junction box embedded into her spine, severing a nerve and causing the knife to limply drop from her hand. Hans looked down at Ryko curiously and reached out, grabbing her by the throat. He lifted her to eye level and squeezed, very gently. "Laurie, where?" the distorted voice growled from beneath the mask. Ryko stared into the red eyes, her life fading quickly. Hans squeezed a little harder. "Where?" he growled. "Fuck you," Ryko choked, using her last ounce of strength to split the blood from her mouth into Hans's terrifying iron mask. Hans squeezed again. As the last of the life drained from Ryko, he dropped her lifeless body to the floor. As Ryko hit the floor, Hans cocked his head to the side and looked down curiously. He slowly bent down to retrieve the newspaper clipping that had fallen from Ryko's pocket. "Teen killer held at Wolf Asylum," the bold headline read. Hans roared under his mask before turning and striding north from Maple Lane. Oh, Jesus, Martha, he's just killed her. And the boy," Jed stammered. It was 4 a.m. when Detective Lucinda Kopp received a call from the sheriff's office at Cedar Creek. Yes, she was familiar with the Carpenter case. They had assured her that they would secure the scene. Thoughts raced through her head during the 5-hour drive to Maple Lane. There was always something that didn't fit with the Carpenter case, and now this. The feds would have to be called, but she'd damn well make sure that this was her case, pull all the strings she had to. As she pulled into Maple Lane, she saw an officer questioning an elderly couple on the front porch. "Yes, sir, saw it all, we did. Mighty big fellow with a sledgehammer and a metal pig mask, causing all kinds of hell here." The wind blew the yellowing leaves round Lucinda Kopp's feet. She looked down and reached for the newspaper clipping that caught on her shoe. Hans emerged from the woods by the side of the I-91 running north. He reached out with his mind. "I'm coming, sister." At Wolf Asylum, Laurie sat upright with a start and opened her eyes.